To move on to our last part of today's session, we're going to be welcoming a very special guest, the Honorable J.B. Pritzker, the Governor of the state of Illinois, and a very strong supporter of all of our efforts to advance quantum information science within our state and beyond. To discuss economic development opportunities and that quantum science and engineering are poised to bring to the state of Illinois and beyond, I would like to introduce Juan de Pablo, the Liu Family Professor of Molecular Engineering at the University of Chicago, also currently the Vice President for National Laboratories, Science Strategy, Innovation, and Global Initiatives at Chicago, and a Senior Scientist at Argonne National Laboratory. I will now turn this over to you, Juan.
Thank you very much, Dale, and welcome, Governor Pritzker. We are so pleased to have you here today to discuss how advancements in quantum science will enable technologies that transform our world, significantly impacting our economy and society. The Midwest, specifically the Chicago area, has a rich concentration of private and public universities and leading national laboratory facilities, which are home to some of the world's foremost quantum information scientists and engineers. The Quantum Exchange has expanded this to include researchers from top-notch academic institutions across the Midwest, as well as industry partners across the world, and with the shared goals, all of us, of advancing quantum science technologies. Unlocking the potential of these quantum advancements, however, will require development of quantum workforce, one that can actually meet the growing demand for skilled workers across communications, optics, computing, materials industries. Governor Pritzker, you've had an early and deep interest in quantum science and engineering. How did this come about?
Well, thank you so much, Juan, and thanks to everybody for joining today and for allowing me to join you. Let me say that, I learned about quantum science and engineering just as somebody who had been a venture capitalist in the technology world before I became governor. And it hasn't been something that, at least in the venture capital world, that there's been enormous opportunities. There have been some, but it hadn't been a focus of mine. But I was learning about it even during my stint as a business person. And most importantly, it has always struck me as just an enormous set of opportunities for whoever it is that captures a lead position. And as somebody who's the governor of the great state of Illinois, the best state in the country, I want Illinois to be number one at everything that we do. And I believe that it's important for us, in order to get there, to find areas where we can be ahead of the curve. And so, quantum engineering is a new discipline, and the playing field, for Illinois is kind of leveled. Indeed, it tilts our way, I would argue. And so we have an opportunity to become an industry leader in this arena by getting at it early. And I think it's one of the most exciting opportunities for our economy for decades to come.
Very good to hear you say that. How do you think about quantum science and engineering in relation to Illinois' leadership in the internet and supercomputing specifically?
Well, number one, my reference to kind of being early is very important. Being an early investor as a state, making sure that the federal government is an early investor in Illinois as a hub of quantum is very important. And then that we build the infrastructure that needs to exist to produce the talent that we're going to need for this industry if we're going to be the center of a good portion of certainly quantum computing, if not much more. So the rewards for us to yield from all of that, from being an early focus leader, are multifaceted. And we, in my opinion, there are going to be big scientific advances that come from whatever it is that we're engaged in here, if we're a leader. And I'm excited about the idea that this is a national security endeavor too. That is that we want the United States to be the leader. I want Illinois to be the leader, but I want the United States to be the leader because of Illinois. And so, there just are enormous opportunities developing computers that are capable of solving in seconds what's currently impossible for even the most powerful supercomputers today. And we're going to lead the way in launching the quantum internet, which will enable secure communications networks and eventually allow us to protect transactions and healthcare information and even our votes. So I'm excited about that, and I really do believe that our leadership position in this, the fact that we're producing 10% of all the computer science graduates in the country out of the state of Illinois, just as one example of how Illinois has great, educational institutions that have the ability to adapt and produce great engineers. I see great things ahead as a result.
So true. Paul DeBar, the Undersecretary for Science at the U.S. Department of Energy, recently wrote an op-ed for Crain's where he noted that America's quantum future runs through Chicago. What do you think he meant by that? And do you agree?
Well, I'm excited to hear somebody outside of Chicago say that about us, because I really believe it's true. I think what he was referring to, of course, is the fact that we've got some of the greatest institutions in the world in this state. As someone who had been in technology venture capital, I used to, in the early days, in the 90s, let's say, as I would talk about, why Chicago, why is there an opportunity for those kinds of startup technology companies back then? Why Chicago? And I would always point to the national laboratories and the great universities like the University of Chicago and the University of Illinois and Northwestern and others. We've got terrific institutions of higher learning here, as well as research institutions beyond that in healthcare and in technology and so on. The truth is that with all those institutions, Chicago never has been the leader in information technology, for example, right? We're always kind of in the second wave, let's say, of states in terms of our ability to produce companies and new ideas. Great talent, great institutions, but the putting those institutions together, working in the same direction, because we weren't sort of the early Silicon Valley of that wave, meant that it's going to be a hard row to hoe to catch up. But when you're early, and I was an early stage investor, when you're an early investor in it, when you're near the front of the line, and when the federal government essentially taps Illinois as it has and says, we're counting on you, I think that's what Paul DeBar was talking about. They've tapped us. They see the potential. You all, many of the people online today, have set up the opportunity for us so that we could get here. And I like to think that I played a bit of a role in that too. But collectively, we created for ourselves, we put ourselves at the front of the line and made it obvious for the federal government to kind of pick Chicago. And so, when he says America's quantum future runs through Chicago, I think it's because there's a recognition in this wave of new technology of quantum that we have all the right kinds of institutions, and we're here ready to go.
Building on that idea about the recognition of Chicago as a quantum hub, in late August, the U.S. Department of Energy announced that it would provide $625 million over the next 5 years to fund 5 newly formed quantum information research hubs. 2 of these are going to be here in Illinois, led by Argonne and Fermilab. both Department of Energy national laboratories managed by the University of Chicago. From your perspective, what was our advantage that led to winning these awards? And what advantage does winning these awards give us in Illinois?
Well, first, the strength of the quantum research that's being done here, that's been done here already in Illinois, both by leading experts at our universities and, and the fact that we've kind of demonstrated expertise at our national laboratories, led to again, as I said earlier, the putting forward of our great institutions as the hubs, the places that the federal government should want to invest, and did. And so, building a quantum future will require collaborating across a whole bunch of sectors. That's something we actually do very well in Illinois. And there's a certain characteristic of the Midwest, especially of Chicago, about collaboration that I think is better than other places. National laboratories, universities, companies. Both of these major national laboratories already coordinate and cooperate and collaborate so well. And they've developed, significant collaborations across the state with leading companies and other institutions, University of Illinois, for example. And so these awards from the federal government enable the continued development of, again, something that you already had done a terrific job of presenting and becoming a leader in. And it means that, our national laboratories and partner organizations will be able to enhance the quantum research that they were already doing and increase the efforts to educate and train the next, series of quantum scientists and engineers over the next 5 to 10 years. I'm thrilled that the University of Chicago is already putting plans together to help ensure that quantum research and education have a really positive impact for the south side of Chicago and the Chicago region overall. And I overall also want to say that it's that even before we become the commercial hub of quantum, which I would think we will become, the economic development, and this is something I obviously pay a lot of attention to, the economic development opportunities and the attraction of people from all over the world who are leaders in this field means a lot to the state of Illinois. And so that's one of the big exciting things about these awards. And to me, we created the opportunity for these awards to come to us, and they wouldn't have come here if not for all of the groundwork that you laid.
Absolutely. I think that from the beginning, you've been an enthusiastic supporter of technology development and economic development. And in 2019, you committed to investing $200 million to help build a quantum infrastructure in Illinois. How did you come to this decision? And where will the funds be used? And when will we start to see their impact?
I should probably start answering that question by saying, even with all the fiscal challenges that Illinois has right now and has had, frankly, for a number of years, that $200 million commitment, which really was a very important personal commitment of mine. It's a commitment of the taxpayers of the state of Illinois, but something I fought for in our capital bill. That is not in danger. With all the things that we're going to have to do to make sure that we balance our budget in these very difficult, COVID-19 times that we're living through, that's not in danger. So I want to make sure everybody knows that. In conversation with universities and others across the state, it really became clear that building an advanced quantum infrastructure has the potential to see, just enormous advances and particularly to speed the kind of research collaborations I was talking about earlier between all of our stellar institutions and our industrial companies, our, big, important parts of our economy and our academic researchers. And We need to accelerate that impact, and it's why I really believed that putting the dollars from the state of Illinois forward had two fundamentally important impacts. One was that obviously the dollars themselves are important for the future of the development of quantum research here, and then secondly, it was a big signal to the federal government that we're united here. The state of Illinois, the city of Chicago, the institutions here, that you can rely upon us to be a cohesive endeavor. So when you put your dollars forward from the Department of Energy and hopefully others, that you can that this is an endeavor we're all singing from the same hymnal here in Illinois. So the state's support of quantum science and technology, I think, communicates also to companies that are working with universities and laboratories that there's really broad support here in the region for everything that's happening. They can, everybody wants to know, when you're putting significant dollars forward and significant effort, if you're a company, for example, you want to know that runway is clear. That there aren't any big bumps in the road. You're not going to, and that you can get velocity for takeoff, and there aren't going to be big potholes in the way. And so knowing that we're working as a cohesive effort is, I think, vitally important. And then I want to say that the facility's location on the south side has the potential for tremendous growth and development in Southside communities and for the residents there. And, there are going to be STEM education opportunities and other things that are beneficial that will come from the investment that we, that we made. So this was easy in a way. I mean, there are a lot of people who don't understand quantum. I'm sure that I only have a layman's understanding. But I have to say, I'm so excited about it, and I tell so many people about our investment here and how we're winning already as a hub of quantum science and technology. And there are people that kind of cock their heads and say, "Why are you so excited about that? What's that?" And I guess I will chalk it up to, I'm not disappointed, I guess, that people don't understand yet. But one thing I know is that a decade from now, or maybe much earlier than that, people will start to feel the effect on their lives and very importantly on the economy of the state. And this is a long-term investment. I'll probably be, long out of office when you start to see that it turns out that Illinois and Chicago are truly the center of the development of quantum across the world.
We'll all be watching, and it is going to be very interesting to see. You pointed out earlier, and it's a fact, you have a distinguished history in tech development from your work in the private sector. What have you learned, and what experiences could you share that could be beneficial in developing the quantum economy within Illinois? What can you tell us that will help us?
Well, I guess I have two reactions to that. One of them is, as you've heard me say throughout my answers so far, I really believe that early investment is the way to become a leader. It's the way to really solve many of the challenges that we have. Before I became governor, and even putting aside having been an early stage venture capital investor, I was very, very involved in early childhood development and investments there. Because when you look at all of the challenges that we have as a society and all the things that you really want to fix in people's lives, making sure that people graduate from high school, go to college, graduate, get a job, don't become addicted to an addictive substance or end up committing a crime, and all the things that you want a great society to be here in Illinois. Investing in our youngest children, as it turns out, is the best return on investment. And because it turns out that those kinds of very early investments in both childcare and in preschool and those early years of K-12, that's actually all the brain development, or at least the vast majority of it, is occurring in those years. So that's really where we ought to put a bunch of our money. So I just say that as a kind of an analogy for the fact that we need to make early investments here in order to reap the enormous benefits that come from being an early leader. And then the second part of that, of course, is just being so I have a bent toward being an early adopter, early investment focus, but Illinois needs also to make leaps ahead. In my view, trying to kind of slog through the mistakes that have been made in the past is much harder than leapfrogging and trying to really be a leader of the future. And so I think about those things a lot just in my job as governor, and I look at quantum and think, this is one of the great opportunities that is right here, right now. And if I don't play a role in it, if the state doesn't play an important role in it, that I might not be doing everything that I can to make us successful for decades to come.
Yeah, yes. So how do you see Illinois benefiting then from having a leading national and, importantly, a global role in quantum science and engineering?
Well, I've talked about a lot of the economic benefits and my own excitement about it, and the fact that I think we're just being a leader is a terrific thing. But I would put on top of that the quality of the talent that we're going to attract and the quality of the talent we're going to build here, educate here, give experience to here, that is going to, that in and of itself is what raises up the future of a state. So when I think about being a leader, and how we'll benefit, that's a big one, because that has all kinds of offshoot benefits. Just having the smartest, best educated people in the world coming to our state, or being developed in our state, getting their experience in our state. Truly, I know the weather doesn't make it that easy for everybody, but you have to ask yourself, why do people stay here and why do people come back? A lot of people leave Illinois and then they come back later. We have a lot of really terrific features that are important, and for the future of our state. And one of them is something that has nothing to do with quantum or even the high level of education. It's that there's a kind of a feeling of that old Midwestern hospitality. We really exude it here in Illinois, all across the state. Chicago too. I know we're a big city, and we've got big city challenges in Chicago, but I guarantee that any of you who've been here a long time, that you notice that when a visitor to Chicago on a sunny summer day, putting COVID aside for a moment, that people will stop and help them find their way around the city. Watching them kind of turn the map, one way or another, trying to figure out on their iPhone where they're going. People care about each other, and families stay here because it actually is a great place to raise a family. And I know those, you all want to hear about the investments in quantum, but I also want to say that when we attract people from around the world, they want to stay here because there is something different about Chicago. You can get all the great benefits of being in a big city, but you also have the benefit of a place that, where people are decent and honest, and you want them as your neighbors.
That is so true. I came here just 8 years ago, and I'm enamored with the city. I'm not going anywhere. It's a fantastic place. But coming back to quantum, the converse is also true. What does Illinois have to do to prepare for the upcoming quantum revolution? And how can we better prepare our students from a really young age, as you were pointing out, but also our industry and others? Who else has to be brought up into this revolution that we are planning?
Well, I think your question is leading. I have to say, we need to do all of those things that you're implying. We need to start our youngest students thinking about this technology. We need to make sure that we're building a foundation for reaching our goal of inclusive innovation as the quantum field grows. We need to make sure that our universities remain the best in the world. I know that the University of Chicago already offers a range of free STEM programs through, in the Chicago public schools. And that's really critical work to helping build STEM education, STEM knowledge and experiences that may not be present in every school. And I know that we're talking about, again, early investments to get us to, what is it we need to do to make sure that we are the winners here in quantum and continue to be. And the answer is, again, I'm talking about early investments, right? STEM programs. And again, we have to partner with the city colleges, for example. The university has been doing that to lay the foundation and advance, inclusive innovation. And making sure that there's a pathway for these kids that we're introducing to technology and STEM education. There's a pathway for them. They understand what steps they can take to follow this, their dream to get involved and engaged and get the kind of education that's necessary, the degrees that are necessary to be, a leading scientist in this arena, like you, like many people on this call. So I also want to say that by building an advanced quantum research facility near the University of Chicago, we're sending a clear message that the south side of Chicago can be a home to a growing, world-beating industry, and that we can grow a workforce that can kind of live and shop and contribute to a local economy, and have a pathway to the economic growth opportunities that have been sometimes sorely missing in places like the south side of Chicago.
So let's, for a moment, speculate a little bit and assume that we're going to be reasonably successful. And let's look out 10 years, 20 years. Based on the investments that our state and the government and private industry are making and our universities, where do you think we're going to be? What are your hopes? What do you think we will have accomplished?
Well, I think being a leader in this field is going to have, you probably can't enumerate how many ways that will benefit the people of Illinois and and the future of our state. I really believe, and I hope, and I intend to help make Illinois the national leader, if not the global leader, for quantum science and engineering education, and that we'll have a really robust economic opportunity that comes from quantum and that benefits the entire region. And then I just want to say once again, the quality of the people who are engaged in this endeavor has already had an impact on our state and will continue to as people gather here. And so I have it's true that I'm an optimist at heart, but I also have a pretty big, vision and belief that we can, making the right investments here, that we're going to live up to Daniel Burnham's vision for the city of Chicago: make no little plans. And we aren't making little plans. You all, the people engaged in the quantum field and making Illinois already a leader in this, are just the tremendously talented individuals that are that we're going to rely upon for the future. And I think about a decade from now, I'll be thrilled when doing whatever I'll be doing then. I'll be able to look back and say, I played a small part in something that no doubt will transform our state and our nation. So
thank you for that, and rest assured you played a very important part. Thank you so much for your time, Governor Pritzker. It's been a pleasure to talk to you, and we look forward to continuing this conversation in the years to come. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.